127A of 2021. These regulations require the Minister responsible for Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion to provide the mid-year fiscal review no later than 31st of July. Madam Speaker, ma'am, today is 31st of July. Madam Speaker, ma'am, on the 18th of December 2024, Parliament approved the 2025 Government Financial Plan, the national budget running under the theme Building Resilience for Sustained Economic Transformation. Its implication, rather its implementation during the first half of the year was on course despite the fast-changing global environment. Notwithstanding, domestic economic developments are upbeat on account of a better than anticipated agricultural season and improved electricity generation at Kariba Hydropower Station. This, combined with sustained economic stability, has provided a conducive domestic economic environment. Madam Speaker, ma'am, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, a recipient of a Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, postulates that, I quote, sustained macroeconomic stability is essential for achieving long-term economic development and reducing poverty, and we want to follow that path of sustained macroeconomic stability going forward. A few words about the global and regional economic outlook, Madam Speaker, ma'am. The global economic growth is now projected at 2.8%, down from 3.2%. We made that forecast in October 2024, and things have changed. And this is according to the IMF World Economic Outlook report of April 2025. This downward revision is on account of anticipated increases in trade tariffs and geopolitical tensions in Europe and in the Middle East. Madam Speaker, there is a slide, I hope it can be seen from that far in terms of the numbers. You can see that indeed the growth projection for 2025 is 2.8%. Advanced economies like the US at 1.8%, Euro area 0.8%, Sub-Saharan Africa 3.8%, and Zimbabwe at 6%, China at 4% economic growth for 2025. In Sub-Saharan Africa, economic growth is projected to decline from the initial projection of 4.2% in October 2024 down to 3.8% by year end. The downward revision is attributed to the negative effects of weather shocks, weak global demand, declining commodity prices, and tighter financial conditions. Again, on the screen is additional numbers pertaining to Sub-Saharan Africa and then also some of the SADC countries. Similarly, GDP growth of the Southern Africa Development Community SADC is projected at 2.8% in 2025. And again, this is a downward revision from the October 24 forecast of 3.3%. And again, you can see how Zimbabwe is juxtaposed against its peers in the region, Botswana with a negative growth rate of 0.4%, which is slightly worse than last year at minus 3%. Or slightly better actually, but still negative. Lesotho 1.5%, for example, Zimbabwe 6%, Tanzania 6%. So those are some of the faster growing countries. Turning on to the domestic economic developments and outlook, Madam Speaker, before I turn to domestic economic developments, let me take this opportunity to brief you on the recent GDP rebasing exercise and the results of the economic census carried out by Zimstat, our statistics bureau. The size of the economy is now approximately $45.7 billion, up from the earlier estimate of $35.2 billion, and this is a 2024 figure. This implies that both GDP and GNI per capita are now slightly above $3,000 per capita. Madam Speaker, again, I've got a table that shows the old figures for 2023, the new figures for 2023. and then the 2024 old figures and new figures, and we can see this dramatic improvement in the size of our economy, which implies that all along we've been under-measuring or mismeasuring the size of this economy. It's much bigger than we think. As a result, the revenue to GDP ratio declines to around 15% of GDP from historical levels of about 18%. Public debt to GDP in US dollar terms also declines to about 46.5% from a level above 60%. And it's also now well below the sub-Saharan average of 61%. Madam Speaker, ma'am, in 2013, the debt to GDP ratio average for Africa was of the order of 30%, but now it is 61%. And I'm pleased to say Zimbabwe is much better at about 46.5% as of end of 2024. In terms of sectoral contribution, the structure of the economy is now dominated by the manufacturing sector at 15.3%, mining and quarrying at 14.5%, wholesale and retail trade at 11.9%, financial and insurance services at 10.8%, and the agricultural sector at 9.3%. Here I'm just highlighting the top 5 sectors in our new GDP structure. I've compared that table. We compare the new structure compared to the old sectoral contribution. And it's pleasing to see that sectors that are value-adding, such as manufacturing, are now contributing above mere retail, the retail sector, which was the biggest before. Madam Speaker, ma'am, now I turn to the domestic economic developments during the first half of 2025. Given the positive economic developments during the period January to June, we are confident that the projected economic growth of 6% alluded to in 2025 national budget is achievable. And again on that screen, Madam Speaker, we show the final figure at the bottom of 6%, but then also show the various sectors that contribute to that growth. Notice that the bulk of this growth is really coming from recovery in the agricultural sector, which has recovered from a growth rate of minus 18.1% in 2024, and this year it should be up to positive 21.5%. Of course, the other sectors are all showing positive growth, but that's the sector that is contributing the most due to its spectacular recovery this year. All sectors of the economy are expected to record positive growth in 2025, mainly on account of a favorable agricultural season, improved electricity generation, stable exchange rate and inflation. This is notwithstanding declining international mineral commodity prices and a subdued global economic environment. Let me turn to inflation and the exchange rate. Madam Speaker, ma'am, month-on-month ZIG inflation has been stable during the first half of the year, as it averaged around 0.5% per month. And on an annual basis, the rate rose to 85.7% in April 2025 to 92.5% in June, largely driven by the base effect. The annual inflation rate is expected to decline significantly from October 2025 as the base effect subsides. Here we had a sharp depreciation in the currency in September last year. That's the base effect. That's having an effect on year-on-year inflation, Madam Speaker, ma'am. We can see again a chart of what inflation looks like on a month-on-month basis, that we are far from the peak that we saw in October, when I was at 0.5%, a big improvement. The stability of the exchange rate explains the low average month-on-month inflation of 0.5% experienced over the past 5 months of the year. The exchange rate has averaged $1 to 26.7 ZIG on the willing buyer, willing seller foreign exchange market over that same period. Let me turn to the external sector. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the country's external sector position has demonstrated remarkable resilience, as evidenced by the notable increase in foreign currency receipts, which rose by 30.2% to $6 billion for the period from January to May 2025. This is compared to $4.9 billion received during the same period in 2024. This again clear from the slide. We can see the biggest change was in export proceeds there was in loan proceeds, 35.1%, and then we have got even remittances, diaspora remittances, with a growth rate of 9.8%. The total showing a very healthy growth in our external position. The current account balance remained in surplus during the first quarter of 2025, registering $19.9 million. To year end, the current account surplus is projected to reach about $621.7 million US dollars. The growth in foreign currency receipts is primarily being driven by an increase in export receipts, particularly in gold exports, which was $2 billion US dollars during the first 6 months of this year. Diaspora remittances is at $924.2 million US dollars during the first 5 months, and loans to the private sector at $1.1 billion US dollars during the first 5 months. I now turn to monetary and financial sector developments. The banking sector remains stable, underpinned by robust capitalization, satisfactory asset quality and profitability, as well as strong liquidity positions. Credit to the private sector grew by 20% compared to December 2024. This is by May 2025 figures. This was largely driven by targeted credit to the productive sectors of the economy. In terms of asset quality, non-performing loans stood at 3.3% as of March 2025, which are below the 5% international threshold or benchmark. The monetary developments, both reserve and let me take that again. On monetary developments, both reserve and broad money growth during the first half of the year were in line with the observed and desired growth path of the economy and inflation target. A few words on the stock markets. There is growing interest by companies to participate on the stock market, is indicated by increase of the number of listings on both the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, ZSC, and the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, VFX. As a result, both the ZSC and VFX recorded positive turnover during the first 5 months of the year. I now turn to public debt. Madam Speaker, the country's stock of public and publicly guaranteed debt stood at 576.5 billion ZiG as at end of March 2025. The debt was comprised of external debt totaling 337.7 billion ZiG and domestic debt amounting to 238.8 billion ZiG, representing 58.6% and 41.6% respectively. There's a slide there 11 showing those figures. In US dollar terms, the total public and publicly guaranteed debt as at end of March 2025 amounted to $21.5 billion US dollars, comprising external debt of 12.6 billion and domestic debt at 8.9 billion. This brings the debt to GDP ratio to 44% as of 31 March 2025. In this regard, government is implementing the arrears clearance and debt resolution roadmap in order to restore debt sustainability and unlock critical external financing needed for the country's development programs. Let me now turn to the 2025 National Budget Fiscal Framework. Madam Speaker, the 2025 National Budget approved by Parliament on 18 December 2024 was premised on a macro fiscal framework with a projected GDP growth of 6%. And we can see that on that table on the screen. And then revenue collections were 270.3 billion ZiG, or 19.9% of GDP, and overall expenditures, a 276.4 billion ZiG, which is 20.1% of GDP, as well as a budget deficit of 6.1 billion ZiG, which is 0.4% of GDP. So that's the macro fiscal framework. In US dollar terms, the fiscal framework translates to revenues of $7.5 billion with expenditures of $7.7 billion and a budget deficit of $168.4 million, which is 0.4% of GDP. Let me now turn to the budget performance so far. Madam Speaker, ma'am, during the first half of the year of 2025, both inflation and the exchange rate were relatively more stable than envisaged. The budget has therefore been performing below projections in terms of revenues in local currency. Although performance was significantly above target in US dollar or foreign currency terms, it's mainly an exchange rate effect. Revenue collections during the period January to June amounted to 101.2 billion ZiG, or $3.7 billion equivalent. This is against a target of 118.1 billion ZiG, or $3.3 billion equivalent. While expenditures were 98 billion ZiG, which is $3.7 billion against a target of 127.5 billion ZiG, which is equivalent to $3.5 billion US dollars. Again, those figures are shown on the screen. Madam Speaker, ma'am, in terms of budget utilization up to June 2025, 35% of the appropriated and approved budget has been spent. And there on the screen again you can see how it's been spent across various ministries. Some of the ministries have been utilizing it quite fast. They have a high burn rate of their budget, and some of them not as high of a burn rate. But we will endeavor to push forward to make sure that everyone catches up with those who are moving faster. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the remaining balance of the budget, which is 65%, we feel is therefore adequate to cater for government's operations to year-end in the absence of any external or domestic significant shocks. Let me give a highlight of some of the key areas. Let me start with social services. Madam Speaker, ma'am, during the first 6 months of the year, government spent 26.6 billion towards the provision of social services under the following sectors: education at 16.1 billion ZiG, health at 7 billion ZiG, and social protection at 3.5 billion ZiG. Zooming onto education, 16.1 billion was expended on the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, of which 12.1 billion went towards compensation of employees for the period January to May 2025. This also includes resources meant to support various programs such as the school feeding program, BEAM and others, and the procurement of sanitary ware. Government also supported the ongoing construction of 5 new schools, namely the E.D. Mnangagwa Secondary School in Mutoko, the Mariga Primary School in Mbire, the Twai Primary School in Bulilima, Sonkwa Primary School in Binga, and Mafungauta Secondary School in Gokwe South. This is the Twai Secondary School in the Bulilima area. As you can see, it's now at roof level, but the roof is still to come on, but we're almost there. Let me turn to the higher and tertiary education sector, Madam Speaker, ma'am. In 2025 national budget, the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development was allocated a total of 5.7 billion ZiG to enhance access to quality, equitable and inclusive education, including students with disabilities. As at the end of June 2025, 1.6 billion had been spent on operations of universities and colleges. On infrastructure, focus was on completing ongoing projects at the University of Zimbabwe, the National University of Science and Technology, NUST, Midland State University, Bindura University of Science Education, and Gwanda State University. I think that's the Techno-Innovation Center at NUST. And the next slide is the Great Zimbabwe University Chivi Traditional Grains Processing Plant to support innovation in that sector and beneficiation in that sector. I now turn to the health sector. Madam Speaker, the health sector received support amounting to 7 billion ZiG, with the bulk, which is 5.7 billion ZiG, expended on compensation of employees, and 1.1 billion ZiG was spent on goods and services, including 0.6 billion ZiG for procurement of medical supplies and services. Madam Speaker, it's again worth pausing. These, letters are a little bit small, but if they were bigger, you would see that there are some very important projects that are being undertaken. For instance, renovations being carried out at Salemugabe Hospital, and then at UBH, the construction of water tank, Bybridge Hospital, bore was drilled, and then in Gwanda Hospital, the renovation of the theatre, in Masingo Hospital, again, a lot of work is being done, in Binga, in Gokwe North Health. So a lot is happening in some of these key and critical health sector institutions, Madam Speaker, across the entire country. Let me turn to some of the social benefits. Just to mention that, Madam Speaker, cumulative disbursements towards supporting vulnerable members of our society stood at 3.5 billion towards programs such as the Vulnerable Agriculture Input Scheme, or from Vudra into as a program, the BEAM program, Food Deficit Mitigation Program, and supporting our War Veterans Affairs Fund. Turning to women, gender equity, and SMEs, Madam Speaker, during the first half of the year, government supported gender mainstreaming interventions with the objective of, one of the objectives is to eradicate gender-based violence, GBV, and here we expended an amount of 98.3 million ZiG. This went towards the construction of a one-stop centers, capacitation of the National Handicrafts Center of Zimbabwe, and provision of workspaces for women engaging in various businesses, among others. And that's a picture of the textile manufacturing sector in Bulawayo to support women's entrepreneurship activities. Turning to youth, sports, arts and culture area, here, Madam Speaker, I want to highlight work on the National Sports Stadium. The process of refurbishing the National Sports Stadium is now at an advanced stage, with the following notable achievements having been realized. The installation of bucket seats is now at 90% completion. Reconstruction works on new turf currently underway, with works currently at 40% completion. Completion of the installation of turnstiles at Gate 1 entrance, and then completion of the cabling and tubing for the venue operating systems, and finally, the restoration of the water reticulation system, which is in progress, and that's one area where we are pushing hard to complete. The budget also extended, I must say, 28.1 million, Madam Speaker, towards this issue of drug and substance abuse, which is mainly affecting our youth. Let me turn to veterans of the liberation struggle. In line with the Second Republic's vision of inclusive economic participation and empowerment of veterans of the liberation struggle, government operationalized the Veterans Investment Corporation and launched a livestock person scheme as well. In addition, the government allocated residential stands and undertook training programs to our veterans community as part of empowerment initiatives. Government also extended resources towards benefits of veterans of the liberation struggle, inclusive of education, medical and funeral assistance. Let me give you a picture of the overall infrastructure expenditure, which includes obviously ICT and the digital economy as well. Madam Speaker, cumulative expenditures on all infrastructure projects to June 2025 amounted to 15.7 billion ZiG, targeting projects in the energy, transport, water and sanitation, housing, health, education and agricultural sectors, as well as devolution. And those figures are shown on the screen. A further amount of 2.1 billion was expended on capacitation of ministries, departments and agencies through the procurement of vehicles, furniture and equipment. Turning to the transport sector specifically, Madam Speaker, a cumulative amount of 7.9 billion was spent on the transport sector, mainly towards the road development program. During the period under review, priority was accorded to the completion of new modern multi-level Trabablas interchange, which was commissioned by His Excellency the President, Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, on 30th of May 2025. And you can see a picture of the majestic Trabablas interchange here in our capital city, Harare. And more of these Trabablases will be built right across the country. The rehabilitation and upgrading of the Bulawayo Victoria Falls Road has commenced, Madam Speaker, ma'am, with contractors already on site and are currently carrying out preliminary works on multi-segments of the highway, including land clearance to create some detours. The Rural Infrastructure Development Agency, RIDA, rehabilitated and upgraded various road projects across the country. Madam Speaker, again, if you turn to the screen, these are some of the roads. For example, the Chipinge Mount Selinda Road in Manekaland in Chipinge district, 10 kilometers was completed by RIDA. I'll just pick another on Bulawayo Nkai, which is a very emotional project. There's some movement, 3.6 kilometers has been primed. And then Nyanga Ruangwe Road, for example, in Nyanga, 10 kilometers has been completed. And on the Gokwe Road, 40 kilometers overlay with asphalt has been also completed. So RIDA is doing its work, Madam Speaker, ma'am, and supporting the Minister of Transport as well as Sinara in our road development program. I now turn to the water and sanitation area. Madam Speaker, ma'am, during the period under review, an amount of 3.9 billion was released towards water and sanitation sector, focusing on dam construction, rural bore drilling, and establishment of village business units in order to enhance access to clean water and promote local economic development. The main priority projects were Kunzi and Gwai Shangani dams, which are essential for improving water supply in major centers. So that's Kunzi Dam to supply Harare with water, Madam Speaker, ma'am, under construction. Then that's the Gwai Shangani Dam, which again is still under construction and will complete it. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the Presidential Rural Development Program targeted drilling and installation of solarized boreholes, water supply and establishment of village business units. To date, the following milestones have been achieved throughout the country under this program. You can see already the Nyamuroro Secondary School in Gokwe North. That's a village business unit. But overall, we have 296 balls that have been drilled, 362 balls that have been installed, 26 water supply projects established, 182 village business units established, and Nyamuroro is one example. And we've also established 152, or rather the establishment of 152 business units is currently underway. Those are in progress, and we'll report on them when I present in November, Madam Speaker, ma'am. Let me turn to the energy sector. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the Rural Electrification Fund, REF, expended 16.3 million ZiG, 216.3 million ZiG, enabling the completion of 114 energy projects in primary and secondary schools, rural health centers, government extension offices, business centers and villages, among others. And you can see these units, 114 in total, if you go down to the bottom right, extreme right, province by province, you can see where these projects have been installed, primary school, secondary, rural, and so forth, totally 114. Meanwhile, and this is an example of the Boni Rural Health Center, for example. Meanwhile, Zimbabwe has developed an energy compact with the African Development Bank and the World Bank under the Mission 300 initiative. The aim is to ensure all citizens have access to reliable, affordable and sustainable energy by 2030. And this energy compact is due to be signed off and launched in an event during the UN General Assembly in September next month, or rather in September, in New York. It will be launched by our head of state, and he will join other heads of states in doing that. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the budget and the Universal Services Fund, I'm now talking to the ICT issues. The budget and the Universal Services Fund provided resources amounting to 436.9 million and 54.3 million ZiG, respectively, to support the development of digital infrastructure. Notable progress was made in modernizing government ICT systems through the establishment of a secure, smart government private cloud. The Minister of ICT successfully connected 30 health facilities in Gokwe North using low Earth orbit satellite broadband, a milestone highlighted during the 45th independence celebrations. In addition, efforts to upgrade the National Data Center to Tier 4 standards are ongoing, targeting 99.999% uptime for critical government digital systems. A bit more on information publicity and broadcasting, Madam Speaker, ma'am. To enhance access to information and citizens' participation in national governance and promotion of real-time dissemination, government is implementing the Zim Digital Phase 2, focusing on the installation of transmitters across the country. On the other hand, the Lieja Community Radio Station was operationalized in Wange in February 2025. Government also launched the media policy during the first half of the year. The policy is designed to promote media excellence, diversity, and general national development. A few words on housing delivery, Madam Speaker. Government spent 746.7 million ZiG towards housing delivery during the period under review. But I can assure you, Madam Speaker, ma'am, the private sector spent a lot more, so did private citizens, on housing development. This enabled the completion and commissioning of, for example, of Mtawa Tower Magistrate Court in Uzumba, Maramba, Fungwe. You can see this is Mtawa Tower Magistrate Court, for example. In addition, and this is our Tombo of flats, and then the recently commissioned Chiboyo flats here in Harare at the police depot. In addition, renovations and construction of diplomatic properties were undertaken in Abuja, Berlin, London, and Pretoria. A few words about an important sector, which is around peace and security. In order to enhance peace and security of the country, an amount of 14 billion ZiG was expended on the security sector. The resources were spent on salaries and allowances, on mobility and housing, and in providing tools of trade, as well as servicing of equipment and infrastructure development. Development partners, Madam Speaker, also made a contribution to our resources, amounting to $148.1 million during the first half of the year. And this was mainly targeted at our health sector, emergency response, and the education sectors. again, there's a slide showing the various contributions for development partners across various sectors. Let me turn to an issue that will become a key focus area in the second half of this year, Madam Speaker, the issue of the cost of doing business. During the second half of the year, government will be seized with the implementation of the doing business reforms aimed at reducing cost and enhancing competitiveness. Meanwhile, government has with immediate effect begun the process of reviewing various regulatory fees and charges. In addition, the number of bureaucratic steps and compliance requirements will be drastically reduced, and we'll be making announcements as we go along, sector by sector. And we want to begin with the agricultural sector with announcement in the next week or two. On the fiscal front, government will continue to review the existing tax system with a view to reducing reported and observed distortions, grant the necessary supportive regime for business growth and competitiveness within and on the regional and international markets without compromising fiscal sustainability. For the medium term, government is pursuing a medium-term revenue strategy that clearly defines the growth trajectory for the revenue to GDP ratio and specific strategies to achieve the desired outcome, including efforts to bring the non-compliant informal sector, or small businesses, I call them, bring those into the formal economy. Let me give an update on the formulation of NDS 2, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, government is in the process of formulating the National Development Strategy 2, NDS 2. 10 national priority areas have been identified, and chairpersons and co-chairpersons for each of the thematic working groups have been appointed. Terminal evaluation of NDS 1 is underway, which will inform NDS 2 formulation by assessing the achievements, lessons learned, and implementation gaps of NDS 1. The public consultations have begun with the launch of the final blueprint set for November 2025, just before the presentation of the 2026 national budget. There is therefore going to be a strong link between the 2026 national budget and the National Development Strategy 2, or NDS 2. I now transition to the conclusion, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, the performance of the economy and the budget during the first half of the year was within the approved levels by Parliament. The macro-fiscal framework underpinning the approved 2025 national budget remains relevant and still supports the targeted project and programs. To ensure that the fiscal policy is complementary to monetary policy in order to sustain the prevailing price and exchange rate stability, government will continue to implement prudent budgeting policy stance, which ensures that all expenditures are strictly guided by the performance of revenues. This entails a continuity of the principle of living within our means. Madam Speaker, the country has enjoyed economic stability during the first half of the year, and I want to assure you and the honourable members here present and the public at large that both the fiscal and monetary authorities are going to stay the course. We all understand the cost and pain of instability, and so we cannot afford any policy slippages. During the second half of the year, government will be seized with the implementation of the ease of doing business reforms, targeting the reduction of fees and charges as well as regulatory requirements, a number of steps in acquiring licenses, for example. This will significantly reduce the operational costs of the industry to enable it to compete both domestically and internationally. Madam Speaker, we have a situation in some sectors where players or private players are only profitable if they don't comply with regulatory requirements. If they comply, they make losses, and that situation needs to be changed. we will lower the cost of doing business. Madam Speaker, ma'am, I now commend the 2025 mid-term budget and economic review to this august House in compliance with the law, and it is accompanied by the following documents: the 2025 mid-term budget and economic review statement, 2, the 2026 budget strategy paper, 3, the citizen document which simplifies the mid-term budget and economic review statement, and then 4, the public debt report to Parliament for 2024 financial year, and then finally a booklet on the structured dialogue platform on Zimbabwe's arrears clearance and debt resolution process. This is not a requirement for tabling in Parliament, but I thought that we should keep our honourable members of Parliament informed. Madam Speaker, ma'am, I thank you. Tinotenda siyabonga.
We are back there just hearing from the Minister, Professor Mthuli Ncube, giving us a look at exactly how we performed in terms of that mid-term budget review. So I am here with Kudzanai Sharara. Kudzi, quite interesting things coming out of the budget there. What were some of the key highlights for you?
Yes, thank you, Rumbi. I think some of the questions that we have been asking and that stakeholders, Zimbabweans have been asking, I think some of the questions have been answered by the Minister. I think one key question that we spoke about earlier as we started the program was to say, first half, the ZIMRA had collected about 1.74 billion. To what extent has they improved on that? And I think the Minister said that they managed to collect 3.7 billion for the first half of the year. And in terms of spending, they spend about 3.5 billion. So that dreaded word that Zimbabweans don't like to hear, that there is a surplus. I think what it basically means is that from your collections, you collect, but in terms of spending, you have to be, well, for lack of a better word, maybe you have to be cautious and then see what have you collected and where exactly should you channel that those funds. But maybe for me also, what was a big worry, Rumbi, is that the ministries are not spending their budget allocations. The overall was that only 35% of the budget allocations were spent, which means that I'm not sure whether it's because there was no money or it's because they were not prepared. You know, when you're spending government money, you have to bring in those the invoices, the quotations, and everything, and make sure that you contract people to do the work. Whether that is being done and then funds are not availed, I'm not sure. But 35% is a big worry. We are already at the half year, and only 35% has been spent. I think that those are some of the of my. I'll touch on other areas that we can talk about. What were your takeaways?
I mean, for me, definitely the realization that we've only spent 35% of the budget, leaving then the 65%. So questions around, is it an underspending? Is it is it more money than we actually need? So was it budgeted appropriately to begin with? I think that struck a chord with me, and I was wondering why the surplus.
And for me also is the question I was asking myself is that, okay, so if somebody has spent more than 100% of what they have been allocated, what happens next? Does he continue to fund them? Do they look for other resources or reallocate resources from those who are not spending to those who are spending? Because at the end of the day, you also need that discipline to say, look, guys, you're spending more than you were allocated. I think maybe they will have to review and see whether they should allocate more funds there. But I'm happy that the priority areas, they continue to channel funds to the priority areas. Whether that is enough, that is another question altogether, to say is the billions, for example, about 3.5 billion was spent, that's 3.5 billion ZIG on social benefits. That's roughly about 100 million. Is that 100 million US? And then the question that you have to ask is that enough? In terms of infrastructure spending, I think about 15.7 billion ZIG was spent on that, which is roughly about 600 million US dollars. Again, the question is that enough? But it's also probably that's what we can afford. Yes.
Of interest, I mean, obviously, I liked the aspects around women and gender mainstreaming, that there was an intentional effort to curb things like gender-based violence. So I think the Minister allocated, well, 98.3 million ZIG was actually expended towards that in the first half of the year. Construction of one-stop centers, really music to my ears, and I hope that more is allocated towards, such a worthy cause. And the intentional budgeting around it is I think, quite a triumph. It's not something that we saw in previous budgets. Yeah, so I was happy to hear that. Also, the amount of 28 million ZIG that was allocated towards drug and substance abuse. I know that you had some comments about that, but I would have liked to see, I think, a little more going towards that, seeing as it's something that we're really fighting against, and it's a big enemy towards economic progress at the moment.
It is. I think at some point, I'm not sure. I think we need to channel more resources towards that. But I think the best way to do it, Rumbi, in terms of dealing with drug and substance abuse, is also to make sure that we provide our youth with something to do. If you look at the latest Zimsted numbers that were provided by Zimsted, the latest ones, when they were looking at the labor force survey, it showed that more than 4 million youth are not, and let's use percentages, I think it was 47% of the youth between the ages of 15 to 24, those youth are not in employment, they are not in education, they are not in any college, so they're just idle youth, so to speak. So you've got 47% of your youth that are like that. Obviously, the stress and the like, you end up doing drugs. I think we need to find things that they can do. I think so. Yes, in terms of resources, it could be indirect channeling of those resources, those vocational training centers, and try and we have got graduates. Let's find some jobs that they can do. There was a debate just a few days ago on social media to say maybe we should have more vocational training centers, and also making sure that the bigger firms, all of them, they've got some kind of graduate trainee. But then again, the statistics will tell you that the bigger firms are only just above 2,000. So even the smaller players should also come in and try and provide work to do for these youth. I think it will be another indirect way of dealing with the issues of drug and substance abuse.
Really
but
well
it's
put,
good
yeah.
that government is noticing.
Yes,
that.
definitely. And as we say, a little more towards that, but it is definitely a good start. There were also, I think, what I found noteworthy and quite interesting, the amount of money that has been given to tertiary institutions, for research and development, 1.6 billion. Do you think that's adequate? We need more. In my head, I always think that this equipment costs more money. We need $1 million towards that, maybe. $1 million more, rather, $1 billion more.
Yes, I think there's always room to continuously capacitate our universities and making sure that and also it will help our universities to transition from being more like theory based to more like practical universities. And to be practical, then you need the funding to buy the equipment that is needed for experiments, for research, and so on and so forth. So there's need for that. Maybe just to go back, Rumbi, some notes that I was also taking in terms of, remember earlier we were asking to say the 6% growth projection, would it be attained?
Yes.
And the minister was strongly saying that
Definitely.
we are going to achieve that 6% growth projections, and obviously looking at the agriculture sector as one of the that recovery in the agriculture sector. In fact, he said that all sectors are set to grow. So yes, that's so yes, those are some of the issues that that the minister spoke about.
There's definitely a lot going on there.
Yes.
And we will be connecting with our correspondent.
Yes, so Eben, we are going to connect to Eben, who is at the parliament, and maybe hopefully you will be speaking to some of the ministers and honorable members of parliament that were there in terms of their reaction to the national budget. Eben, hi Eben, can you come through? Yes, Eben, welcome to the special program on the 2025 mid-term budget statement. Eben, can you tell us what is the atmosphere like in terms of the reaction to the minister's mid-term budget statement?
Yes. All right.
Well, good afternoon. We are, of course, live from Mount Hampton, where we saw the presentation of the midterm review, of course, by the Minister of Finance, Professor Mthuli Ncube, speaking to the progress that's been made from a fiscal front where macro economies, of course, are concerned. Now, he also did make reference to just how much has been spent to date. 35% of the budget has been expended. 65% will be spent, of course, in the remaining aspects of the year, with key highlights, of course, being where security is concerned, as well as infrastructure projects, of course, with a highlight on the Trabablas. And the minister did make reference to the fact that more Trabablas projects are actually in the pipeline. Now, of note also is the fact that he did make reference to just how there has been a revision in terms of the size of the economy, the GDP, and of course in the presentation of the 2025 budget, of course there was an indication that the value of the Zimbabwean economy was placed at 32 billion, and from this particular presentation he did make reference to a 44 billion, 45 billion figure for the Zimbabwean economy. Now what that does is that it transforms Zimbabwe's debt to GDP ratio from 60% to about 44% thereabout. Of course, would need to just look further into those specific aggregates as has been presented. Now, there was also a reference to the fact that Treasury will be seeing to it that there is a revision in terms of the taxes, the levies, the duties that are charged to business, with the mission of seeking to reduce the cost of doing business in Zimbabwe. By means of an illustration, the cost of producing a liter of milk in Zimbabwe is 60 cents. When you look at South Africa, Malawi, Zambia, that's about 30 to 40 cents. So that just gives you an indication of the cost of doing business in Zimbabwe, which is higher than our regional counterparts. You look at, of course, where mining education is concerned, agriculture, tourism, in the tourism subsector, there are up to 17 tax heads that operators in that subsector have to deal with. So the minister did not get into the specifics as to what revisions that are being made. So he said that they are going to be made in phases, starting with the Ministry of Agriculture, and he did not give, of course, a particular sequence, but agriculture will be, of course, the first to come in with expected revisions, just as a means of trying to reduce the cost of doing business for those players where agriculture is concerned. Of course, Zimbabwe being Africa's largest tobacco producer and the world's sixth, you would also want to look at other subsectors such as mining. Also from that mid-term budget review, the minister made reference to just how the mining sector has generated increased revenue collections. That's in the first 5 months of the year, north of 6 billion, up from about $4.9 billion in the same period last year. So these then would be key sectors to look into to try and see how, be it in the industry sector, how to increase the industry capacity utilization, which currently sits at about 52%, and it has been sailing below 60% at least over the past decade. So these would be some of the areas where there would be indications and expectations that the minister would be coming through with reforms that would make it easier for businesses to operate within the Zimbabwean economy. Any moment now, we are expecting to see the Minister of Finance passing through this very space. So I'm just going to check to find out if he is anywhere inside, but we hope to have just a quick interview with him to find out and to get certain issues clarified, and perhaps we may just get a hint in terms of how we could be seeing revisions where some of the those aspects are concerned. I'm just getting an indication now that the minister should be in short, and the Minister of Finance now joins us, of course, in the short. Sir, good day. And fantastic. Now, just to sort of make a follow-up to some of the indications that you made in the delivery, of course, of your mid-term budget review, where, of course, the cost of doing business is concerned. You spoke about the subsector of agriculture. Would you want to hint on some of the reforms that perhaps business players within that regard could expect?
You know, the cost of doing business is a big issue for our private sector, where in some businesses you can only be profitable if you don't comply. You know, so you have to cheat government to remain in business. And the dairy sector, now that we're talking about agriculture, is one such sector where we found out that if dairy farmers complied with all our regulatory requirements as government, they would not make money, would not grow the sector. So it's important that we must remove and reduce some of these regulatory costs, and that's what we are doing. That's what His Excellency has tasked us to do.
Right, let's move on to the big one. 35% has been expended, and we are at the close of July. Why is that? 65%, and yet we've got just 5 months to go.
Oh, you know, the first half of the year, in fact, the first quarter of the year is always slow in terms of expenditure. First of all, the revenues come in slowly from January to March, but also in terms of spending, ministers take time to put their act together. It's normal. So they then gather speed in the second quarter. So third quarter, you'll find that there will be a catch-up quite a bit in terms of the burn rate for the budget. But also there's another issue. If you look at the structure of our revenue flows, we get the lowest percentage of revenue inflows in the first quarter, and the highest revenue inflows in the last quarter of the year. Can you imagine, between October and December, that's when we get most of our money. So ministers have no time to be able to deploy those resources. So we've been fine-tuning some strategies for smoothing these revenues, where, for example, we can borrow in the third quarter, borrow in the domestic market, and then the ministers can then spend that money. We then repay those treasury bills or monies in the last quarter when revenue inflows come in at the end of the year.
Now,
so that's how we're trying to manage the flow of revenues and expenditure behavior.
Right. The last one I would ask in terms of the infrastructure projects. You mentioned that more trababuses can be expected and more expenditure from an infrastructure perspective are to be expected. What will you employ to ensure that we don't find ourselves where we have been in the yesteryears? That's, of course, from a printing perspective.
Well, you know what? We are very determined to develop our infrastructure because when we invest in infrastructure as an economy, as a country, you're actually investing in current and future growth. And better still, we're mainly using domestically owned construction companies. They are building capacity, creating jobs. They are contributing to growth. The raw material that they use is all contributing to economic growth. So when you invest in infrastructure, you are investing in economic growth. We're not printing money. We're using our own resources. We're using some structures, debt structures, which is normal in infrastructure finance. I think we've been doing it smartly. We have a good relationship with our contractors right across the board. Even though you hear noises about, oh, we were paid late, but these are our friends. These are our partners. They look after us well as government, and we also look after them well with a wonderful relationship.
Minister, thank you for speaking to ZTN Prime.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Well, of course, that was the Minister of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion speaking to us and giving us hints into what we can expect in the rest of the year and what this means for the economy going forward. Of course, a highlight on agriculture as well as a highlight on the infrastructure projects that can be expected from this very point. Back to you at the studio.
Many thanks, Eben. Really quite interesting to hear the minister's perspectives on a lot of those issues. He answered a lot of the questions we had in the studio.
Yes, yes, Rumbi. And one key question that he answered that most Zimbabweans will be interested in was that of why only 35% of the budget has been spent yet. And you then realize that no, maybe the funds were not yet there because they are slow in the first quarter, and the revenues will only come at the end of the period. That's why there is that mismatch between what would have been spent, 35% versus 65% in the second half. So I think it's an important. I found that very important because we always ask why is it like that?
Change why?
Yes, yeah. And joining us for the analysis of the budget also in the studio is economist Blessing Nyatanga. Blessing, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Blessing.
Thank you.
Yes, maybe just a question for you, Blessing.
Yes.
Your key takeaways from the budget.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the issue of licenses and fees for businesses. I think many businesses have been grappling as far as licenses and permits is concerned. So I think that has been a hindrance as far as investment is concerned. And the fact that the minister has promised to reduce these licenses, I think it's a very welcome idea. And that is one thing that will actually help the country on a trajectory to ensure that businesses grow and ensure that ultimately GDP grows, because we have more investment, we've got more production, as businesses now have the motive to produce more without that hindrance as far as licenses are concerned.
So the cost of doing business being a big aspect there.
Yeah.
What I also liked, Rumbi, my fear was that for a post-cabinet briefing this week, when it was announced that cabinet had approved for these reviews, my fear was that we are going to wait for another 6 months before we start to hear what would have been reviewed. But the minister said, starting with the agriculture sector, in the next few weeks, you'll be announcing some of the changes that would have been made. And it's true. For example, the permits that you need to be running a dairy farm, more than 20 of permits that you would need. And I think it's something that needs to be looked at so that we streamline and remain with a few. Maybe Blessing, what else caught your eye from the budget?
I think the possibility of bringing cohesion between different sectors. So you've got the Ministry of Finance, you've got the Central Bank, you've got the agricultural sector, you've got other investment sectors. I think it was key to ensure that there is more cohesion between all these facets of the economy. Because I think we are mostly mistaken when we hear of the budget. At times, we only think it's the Minister of Finance and the central bank, which are supposed to, to be in cohesion. But it's actually many other different sectors that are actually supposed to collaborate for the ultimate benefit of the country. So I think I'm happy that there will be that involvement between the agricultural sector, between improving trade policies, improving investment policies. I think that will be important as far as going forward.
Great, Blessing. And I'm also just wondering, I mean, what did you make of, the new way, shall we call it that? It's a new method, isn't it, of calculating GDP, which actually shows us that we have more. And I think it was brought down to about, what was it, 3,000 per capita? Is this a significant improvement?
Yeah,
I mean,
it is a significant improvement, Rumbi. And I've seen that a lot of people would question to say, but we are just rebasing. But if you have got sectors of the economy that you are not accounting for, that's a misnomer, because you need to account for everyone who is benefiting economically or who is economically active. They need to be accounted for, and they need to play their part within the fiscus. Of course, what it has also done for us is that when moving from 32 billion to 45.7 billion, what it has also done, it makes our debt look like it's not much, but at the same time, it also makes our revenues look like we're not collecting as much, but which is also in a way a good thing, because we are now saying, okay, if this is the size of our economy, we should be collecting more from business. And I always say that everybody has to play their part. If you're going to contribute $1 to the fiscus, then it's $1. But to have free riders within our economy, I don't think that's a good thing. Everybody has to play a role. But also, maybe we need to streamline to make it easy for people to be formalized, and also making sure that the costs are not too high. Because, like the minister rightfully said, to say, you look at the cost of doing business. If everybody was complying, most businesses will not be profitable. So there is really need to, I think if we sort the cost of doing business, people will be like, but at least now it's cheaper for me to formalize, and I'll still remain profitable even after formalizing.
Interesting indeed. And maybe, Blessing, coming to you, your insights on the recategorization of industries. Manufacturing now coming way up, much higher than retail, which shows us, I mean, in my view, that we're making more than we're buying. What do you make of this this trend and this movement to see more manufacturing coming? I think it's manufacturing, mining, then retail.
Yeah, I think that has always been an integral part of the economy. It has always been something that has called for attention, because the issue of manufacturing helps us to also manage our exports, which is where we expect so much revenue. So as far as importing more than we export, I think that has not been a healthy position, and there's been need to improve that. So I think it looks promising. You also look when the president traveled to Japan, I think he met executives from Toyota to actually improve our automobile industry, which has been down since Quest and Willowvale. So I think if that area improves, it will ultimately improve our GDP, and it will also boost our exports, which is a position that we need to improve.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And just to come in there, Rumbi, the manufacturing sector now contributing about 15.6% of the GDP, which is the highest. And the good thing is that the latest statistics coming from Zimsted showed that the retail sector, that's why more people are employed in the retail, wholesale and retail sector. But if then the manufacturing sector is coming up, it means that whatever we are selling in those retail and wholesale are locally produced products rather than imported products. So we need to continue. I don't think we are yet to scratch the surface in terms of making sure that most of the things that we consume here are locally produced. I think, yes, we've done well in terms of if you go to the grocery, if If you go into our supermarkets, I think we've done well in that space. But I think we need to also have industries that produce for other industries, manufacturers for other manufacturers. And what I'm trying to say is that the inputs that are used by, for example, a vehicle manufacturer should be produced locally. Now we have Manize there where steel is being produced. So steel that is used by whoever is doing construction, it's now localized steel. I think that if we do that, then we will continue to grow our economy.
I'm seeing that picture, and then our lithium manufactured here,
Yes.
batteries made here, our tertiary institutions doing all the assembling. I definitely think that that would be the way to go.
Yeah, now that you've mentioned it, the Harare Institute of Technology, the Vice Chancellor there, he said that they can now manufacture lithium batteries, they can now manufacture solar panels, but what is then needed? We've been inventing these things. What is lacking is to move from that to commercialization, where the solar panels that are sold here in Zimbabwe have to be produced here in Zimbabwe. And he said one statistics which which for me I found it very interesting. He said 99.9% of the solar panels that are being sold here in Zimbabwe are rejects. And he said that the ones that they have done, I think it's a prototype, are 25% more efficient than every other solar panel that is being sold here in Zimbabwe. So if we are to capacitate them, what would it take to bring in the funding and capacitate them? And I think it's an area that the minister has to also really look at bringing the funding, make it, put the incentives for anyone who wants to come and partner the Harare Institute of Technology, and we manufacture those things here.
Absolutely, even patents. I know now we're veering off into intellectual property. There's so much coming out of this, but it's an exciting proposition. Blessing, any final thoughts perhaps on the way forward? Post this mid-term budget review, we've got 65% of the budget to spend. Is that going to make us a little more impulsive, maybe? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Or destabilize the
destabilize the
economy.
economy,
Yes.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think the issue of having more in the budget is not exactly a problem, but I think the problem is managing the fundamentals. And talking about fundamentals, we go to production. You know, as long as we manage our production, as long as we boost our production, I think there won't be any problem as far as the currency is concerned. But if we continue to spend without managing the fundamentals, then obviously we will see problems as we have in the past. So I think there has to be praxis, there has to be a pragmatic approach as far as implementing issues that have to do with producing more and ensuring that our currency is backed by production and not only by, you know...
By what? by reselling, and a lot of shenanigans.
I think there has to be production, yeah.
Production first, absolutely. Kuti, I don't know whether you have anything else for Blessing before we let him go, but it has been excellent talking to you.
Yes, thank you, Blessing, for joining us this afternoon as we were reviewing the 2025 mid-term budget statement announced by the Minister of Finance and Economic Development. And hopefully the second half of the year, which we have already started in July, will remain as stable as the first half of the year. And hopefully Zimra can continue to collect more so that we have got enough to spend even for as we go into the 2025-2026 agricultural season, which historically tends to destabilize the exchange rate, tends to destabilize prices in the shops. So we can hope for a better outturn in the second half of the year.
Fingers and toes crossed on that one, indeed. So quite a lot coming out of the review. If you're just joining us, thank you so much for staying with us. We were hearing there from our correspondent from Eben, but we are in the studio, Kudzanai and myself from Bidzai. And I think another thing before perhaps we close off, the expectations around even the NDS2. And how it's going to be tied to the overall, the way that we finish off the budget, and also looking forward to the 2026 budget. I thought was an important thing to put out there for us to consider in the planning as well as in business operations.
Yeah, what I've realized in the last couple of years is that all the budgets will be feeding from NDS1. So we need to make sure that NDS2 is the best in terms of policy that we can ever do, because then the minister will just have to look at NDS2 and then do his budget. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And on that note, that brings us to the end of the review of the mid-term budget statement that was presented this afternoon by the Minister of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion, Professor Mthuli Ncube. I'm Kudza Naishara, and I was co-presenting this with Rumbi Zaivenge, and with our guest economist, Blessing Nyatanga, joining us in the studio. Bye-bye for now.